Most doctors don't even know how to help you. So I think the most reliable way of really testing is to test yourself. There's tons of low histamine diet guides out there, but I take it a step further.
I've tried everything. When someone is to that point, what do you see as being missed? We had a lot of requests and questions from listeners about histamine in particular in previous episodes. So we're going to dive into all that. We're going to explain what it is, people who might have it but not know. We're going to cover some of the symptoms and signs, but also people who have it, they really want to know, okay, what do I do? What's my next step? And there's a lot of options. I think that's where people get confused and that they have questions about, okay, how can I narrow this down for myself? So if you're listening, stick with us. We're going to sprinkle that in throughout the episode as we kind of delve into this and get a full view of it. So to start, Tammy, can you just describe what the typical person who's dealing with histamine intolerance, what the signs, symptoms are, or the types of clients, people that come to you?
Well, they're dealing with a lot of confusion and overwhelm, I'll tell you that much. Most people have been struggling with a lot of chronic health symptoms for quite some time, oftentimes in different systems of the body, which is one of the things that makes histamine intolerance really confusing. Really, I find that no two people look exactly alike in terms of their cluster of symptoms. Because of the way histamine works in the body, histamine overload or histamine intolerance can cause symptoms in virtually every system of the body. So usually they will have a lot of GI symptoms, but not always. Sometimes people don't have any GI symptoms. So gas, bloating, diarrhea is more common, but sometimes it's a combination between diarrhea, constipation. There can be skin-related symptoms, hives, rashes, eczema, psoriasis, itching, respiratory symptoms, so chronic sinus issues, congestion, runny noses, lots of mucus, coughing, wheezing, those kinds of things. An asthma diagnosis out of nowhere is pretty common. Cardiovascular symptoms, so a racing heartbeat, heart palpitations, nervous system issues, so lots of panic attacks, anxiety, sleep issues are really, really common. One of the reasons, or the reason for that, is because one of histamine's jobs in the body is to help keep us awake during the day. And levels of histamine tend to be more elevated at night. So when you're ready to kind of close up shop for the night and go to sleep, you lay down and all of a sudden your brain's racing and you're getting panicking and a racing heartbeat because histamine levels are elevated. So sleep issues are really common: headaches, migraines, brain fog, confusion, hormonal disruptions. So women a lot of times with histamine issues might have worse symptoms around the period. Muscle, like joint and muscle pain. So really histamine, elevated levels of histamine can cause symptoms virtually every system of the body. And like I said, no two people tend to look exactly the same, which can make it really confusing. And oftentimes people are jumping from one doctor to another with, different specialists that are focusing on all of these different systems of the body, and nobody connects the dots. And sometimes they're chasing these symptoms for decades before they finally realize they're all connected.
Yeah, and I can understand why, right? Like as you're explaining these different systems, say gas or bloating or indigestion, right? When that happens, you're going to think, oh, I've got a stomach problem. Oh, I've got a problem with my digestion, and look there. And then it just gets amplified when you go to conventional healthcare because that whole system is segregated into these very siloed, highly specialized professionals that just look at their one area, and they're notorious for not understanding the other areas and talking between the two. They'll just send you to the neurologist if that system is impacted. So the whole system and much of our Western understanding of the way the body works and what symptoms means, it does kind of set you up to not catch something like this that can be more systemic. So why is it? How does the histamine work in the body? Why is it the case that it can affect all these disparate systems throughout the entire body?
Okay. So histamine is what a lot of people don't realize, and what I didn't realize on my journey. When I heard the word histamine, I thought it was, something floating around in the air that was making me itch and sneeze. Because you hear about antihistamines, right? But histamine is actually something that we produce endogenously in the body in cells called mast cells, which are massively important part of our immune system. And these mast cells that hold on to histamine and lots of other chemical mediators, inflammatory chemical mediators, they are located virtually everywhere in the body, all over the body. And we have histamine receptors that hold on to histamine or grab a hold of histamine so that we can use it when it's needed in these different areas of the body immediately. So because we have these histamine receptors on cells everywhere in the body, and the cells that release histamine also everywhere in the body, when those, when we have elevated histamine levels in the body, it can impact and cause symptoms virtually everywhere in the body because the cells, all have histamine receptors.
And why is that? What do we use it for?
It's an important part of our immune system. So we have, histamine has lots of different jobs and functions in the body as part of our immune system. It is, it helps to, when we have some sort of a threat to the body, we use histamine as part of the immune response to help protect us against that threat. So that's why we need it. We need it in virtually every system of the body as part of our immune system.
Okay, yeah. So the immune system spread throughout the entire body. And so there's a benefit to it too, which I think is important to point out, because people who go down this road, like you said, they're miserable for 10 years, some people even more. We've had people comment on previous videos, 20, 30 years of this. So understandably so, if they start to narrow in and say, oh, this is, some people get the idea that's the cause, but I would say it's more of a symptom, but it's a way to label and describe and explain all these different symptoms going on and kind of narrow it down, which usually gives people a little relief, gives people, makes them feel better. Like, okay, there's some explanation, but I like pointing out why it's useful and good, because it's not like you just want to eradicate it and remove all of it from your body. And that does explain why it's found throughout all these different places.
If we didn't have histamine, we'd die. Like we would die without it. We have to have it. It's an important part of our immune system. It's not the enemy. We just don't want too much that we can't break down effectively.
Exactly. So let's talk about that. You mentioned earlier, you used the term overload, and overload of histamine, and also intolerance is another term that gets added to it. How does a person get to that point, or a body get to that point, where something that's required for survival, part of the immune system, is then becoming overbearing and it's behind all these painful symptoms?
Okay. So what happens is we end up in some cases, losing the capacity to break histamine down as fast as it's building up in the body. DAO, or diamine oxidase, which is the primary enzyme that breaks histamine down in the body, it is produced primarily in the gut lining. And so that is why the gut is so intricately connected. Gut damage, I'll say, is so intricately connected to the development of histamine intolerance, because lots of things are going on in the gut, in that gut lining. It's not just like a smooth, empty tube that our food goes through. We have lots of things happening, one of which is the production of various enzymes, one being the DAO enzyme that breaks down histamine. So when the gut is damaged from excess exposure to chemicals and medications and stress and all the different things that we're faced with in our modern world, one of the things that happens is we're not producing enough DAO to break down histamine. So then we stack on top of that really high levels of stress, and we are really stressed. We are releasing more histamine into the body. It stimulates the mast cells to release more histamine. And the mast cells themselves can become overly active or agitated and sort of vicariously dump their contents, whenever they feel like it, basically. And that leads to elevated histamine levels. And if you don't have enough DAO to break it down as fast as it's being released, then you end up with too much histamine built up in the body and hello symptoms everywhere.
Right. Okay. So the immune system, specifically these mast cells, getting irritated, getting poked, start to release the histamine. And then if too much histamine gets released or more gets released, then the body can break down. And it sounds like in large part because of the DAO enzyme and maybe a lack of it, then these symptoms happen. How can somebody find out whether this is present for them, whether this is the cause of the symptoms? Because a lot of the symptoms you listed off, I mean, honestly, someone listed, probably everybody could find one of those that you listed off that they have. So is histamine intolerance that prevalent, or how can someone know if that's the issue versus something else, same symptom, but that's not what's behind it?
Well, it can be complicated to kind of pin down what it is exactly. I think it's more common than is diagnosed, because, like we were talking about earlier, doctors aren't really looking for that. They're not identifying it. And a lot of doctors actually poo-poo it as a condition at all. So there are some lab tests that can be done to give you an official diagnosis of histamine intolerance. There's a blood test that measures histamine levels after a dietary challenge, but that's not super reliable because your levels can fluctuate really significantly. And so, elevated levels could or could not, be indicative of histamine intolerance. There's a urine test that does kind of the same thing. Again, that isn't super dependable because the levels can fluctuate based on your hydration levels and your diet and things like that. There's a test that measures your DAO levers, and then there's some mast cell mediator testing that can be done. But honestly, I'm not a big proponent of chasing a diagnosis. And the reason for that is because, so you have this diagnosis, and I think we're in this, this culture, or this, and that's not the right word I'm looking for, but we've been sort of indoctrinated to believe that we should seek a diagnosis and then a treatment for that diagnosis. But in the case of histamine intolerance, there are always underlying causes that need to be addressed. And if you go to your conventional doctor and you chase down these diagnoses, one, you might be waiting for months for an appointment with the right specialist. And then the testing that you do might not be that reliable. So, and then what? Most doctors don't even know how to help you. So I think the most reliable way of really testing is to test yourself. Do you have a cluster of symptoms that match in different symptoms of the body? That saying, if it looks like a fish, it smells like a fish, and it tastes like a fish, it's probably a fish, right? So if you have a cluster of symptoms that correlate, there's a likelihood that it may be a histamine-related issue. The second thing is a lot of people can do a dietary challenge, eat a low histamine diet for a few weeks and see if you have an improvement of symptoms. That works for some people, not everybody. Some people, especially if they've been really sick for decades in some cases, a dietary challenge, short term might not give them relief that they're looking for. So the dietary challenge is one thing. But then if you do figure out that you have an improvement of symptoms with the dietary challenge, I do like to emphasize with people that just following a low histamine diet isn't going to fix the problem. It's going to help relieve some symptoms, but it's not going to fix the problem. And then in some cases, and I find this is not the case with a lot of people, there is an enzyme supplement that you can get called, it's a DAO enzyme supplement. It's pretty expensive. And some people, when they take this, they have a pretty significant improvement in symptoms if they take it before they eat. So any, food that they're ingesting that's higher in histamine, if their symptoms improve when they take this supplement, then they may get some relief, and that's a clue that it's a histamine-related issue. But again, I've found that the DAO enzyme supplementation just isn't helpful for a lot of people, so I don't think it's the first place to go, especially since it's kind of an expensive supplement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so where do you prefer as a first step?
I think trying a low histamine diet, to see if you if you have an improvement in symptoms. In my functional clinic, I run some functional lab tests. They're not to diagnose histamine intolerance, though. So I'm looking for, other clues of what's going on under the hood, so to speak, that is driving the issue. But it's not to diagnose histamine intolerance. It's more to help my clients figure out what some of the underlying causes of the problem are. And there are many underlying causes. I think people are always looking for their root cause because, at this point, most people have heard of functional medicine and root cause medicine. And I always tell people, a dead cow upstream is going to create dirty water downstream that could make you sick. And with histamine intolerance, mast cell issues, there's usually 50 or more dead cows upstream that we've got to get out of the water in order to fix the problem.
This is why it's confusing to people with histamine intolerance, because it's a lot of different potential causes and everybody's different. So you're going to set yourself up for more of that overwhelm. And I think this is why I'm even realizing this more now, why so many people in that area do get overwhelmed, because it's like it's taking too big of a bite out of the pie. It's not focused down enough. It describes some of the problem of what's going on, but it's not describing what, the specific initial causes, or for sure the steps to walk yourself out of that. So do you find that your functional testing helps people drill down, get more specific, and then start to be able to make progress forward?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also want to give a caveat that, functional testing can be really helpful, but it's not always the place to start. And I think we can start simpler. And in many cases, we can allocate our money to the interventions needed to fix the problem if we know what they are, versus especially, some people, they want that black and white. They want to see all these things on paper. But if we know what a lot of those underlying causes are, and lifestyle related, gut related, mold, things like that, I think that the paper's not always necessary, and it's not always the place to start. I love functional labs, get a lot of great information from them. But in some cases, they can cause a little bit more overwhelm for people. And people are already really, really overwhelmed, and they don't know which way to turn. And they've been told to take, this methylation panel and take this DNA test and spend $600 on it. And they spend $600 on this DNA test that says they have these gene SNPs, and then they should take, this supplement, and that supplement's going to save their life. And that's not how it works. So I think a lot of times people's money is better allocated on the interventions needed to, fix the problem than on all the rabbit holes of a ton of tests. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's kind of where I am as a practitioner.
It does. And I also, at the same time, I run tests in my practice, and they've been very valuable too, but it resonates because the tests are a tool, and a tool, it's like a hammer. Is it good or bad? Neither. It could be, it depends on the situation and who's using it. And same thing with the tests. test is just a test. It's you get the test and it doesn't make you better. And I found in my own experience, one test in different practitioners' hands led to very, very different protocols and results. And so it's like, yeah, everyone thinks this is the greatest test. Well, who's interpreting the test? And even more than the interpretation or along with it is what's the comprehensive plan that they're creating. And that's where it does resonate. The test can be a drawback because just like a label or a diagnosis, we're so ingrained to just let that tell us. I mean, if people got a test that said, you're going to be sick the rest of your life, they believe it. And they go, well, nothing I can do, when it couldn't be further from the truth. And so in that sense, I do think the tests are limiting. In other sense, sometimes people need to see something. Again, sometimes we find something really big on the test, and then it gives them a little validation and a direction to go. So again, just a tool. But I agree, it's got to be used wisely, and then it's whose hands is it in. So can we go into, you mentioned lifestyle or like other interventions that can happen earlier. Can you go into some specifics of where you start or commonly start, or someone watching this can maybe start to think about for themselves or take to their practitioner to look into?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So if I can just kind of finish up the thought though on the testing, like you said, they can be very, very valuable, and in the right hands, give us lots and lots of insights and a roadmap as to where to go. But the roadmap doesn't only come from the test. And I think a lot of times, especially the way we've been conditioned in our society, we have this test. And now in functional medicine, it's more of a protocol. And what I mean by protocol, I think there's a very broad spectrum of what somebody might mean by a protocol. In my definition, a protocol is everything that we're doing to fix the problem. But unfortunately, I think in a lot of functional practitioners' perspective, it's really a combination of supplements. And that's where it stops. And I think that's where a lot of people are really frustrated, because they get an interpretation with this test. They get a list of supplements to take. They don't really understand why they're taking them or how they're helping, or they're taking them in the wrong order. And, and so I want to emphasize that supplements will likely play a role in your healing if you're struggling with this. And they are an important piece of the puzzle, but they are not at all the only piece of the puzzle. There are a lot of things that we have to dial in, and we have to dial them in consistently. One of which is our diet. It is really, really critical. I don't just emphasize a low-histamine diet. I want my people removing all potentially inflammatory plant foods from their diet. So not just, there's tons of high-histamine or low-histamine diets guides out there, but I take it a step further, because I want my people to crush inflammation at the cellular level as quickly as possible. And one of the best ways to do that is to get rid of all potential foods that are driving that inflammation, poking holes in the gut and stealing minerals from the body and all of that. So that's an important piece of starting point, is dialing in the diet. And also, and this is something that I really learned for myself, and it was part of my healing journey. And this is the piece. And if you're struggling with this, I want you to listen up right now, because this is way bigger than you probably bargained for. And that is your mindset and your life history. We are a compilation of all of the minutes of our life from even before birth until right now. And you may be operating on a system you don't even realize you're operating on, in terms of your behaviors, your thought patterns, and things like that. And one of the questions that I started asking for myself when I was really sick and truly believed I was going to die back in 2011, I'm getting goosebumps thinking back to that. Laid awake at night, every single night for like 5 hours, just with perpetuating thoughts circling in my mind. I'm going to leave my 2 kids without a mom. They're going to be orphaned. They're going to have to go to their graduations without their mom. They're going to have, no mom to meet their first girlfriends or be at their weddings or, meet their kids. And that was massive for me. And I was seeing all the doctors, world-renowned specialists, and I just continued to get sicker and sicker, the more medications and surgeries and all this other things that they were giving me. And one day I started asking myself, could anything from my history, from my traumatic childhood, be potentially causing the reason I'm sicker than everybody else all the time? And I started digging into the childhood trauma component of this and the mindset and the buried anger and resentment that I had for my parents and, different things that happened to me as a child. And it was when I started really diving into that part and releasing things and leaning into things like gratitude and making gratitude a practice, which, by the way, when I first started writing in gratitude journal, I hid it on my nightstand and buried it under stuff so my husband wouldn't see it because I thought he would think it was too crazy. It literally changed my life. So I know that was kind of a ramble, but if you're struggling with this, I want you to understand how important your mindset is in this and addressing all of those different layers, the diet, the lifestyle habits, the things that you're putting in and on your body in terms of the chemicals and the exposures, the quality of the air you're breathing, the quality of the water you're drinking, and the quality of the thoughts that you are allowing to circulate on repeat through your mind all day long. So if you are constantly thinking about your symptoms and how awful you feel and how unfair it is and all of those things, this is not to make light of the pain that you are truly experiencing, but what you focus on grows. So mindset shifts are critical. And that's why I say there's not just one dead cow upstream. There are 50 or more dead cows, and you gotta get them all out of the stream. So it's not just a matter of taking a bunch of supplements. It's not going to fix the problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I used to think that too. I bought like hundreds of bottles. I had like a full cupboard of bottles of supplements. And then after years, like going through all my health issues, eventually I really learned the idea. It's a supplement. It is supplemental. Like I agree. It is a piece, and like they can do some amazing things. But when my mindset coming from probably, the more conventional paradigms, like I just need the strong pill that's going to fix this. And it's, you go through that long enough, and eventually I feel like I learned the hard way, but eventually you realize like it can't do it all. Certainly not alone, but as a supplemental, it can be a boost.
Well, and I think it's also the right combination of things. It's a lot of times people want the magic supplement. There's not a magic supplement. It's usually the right combination of things used in the right order in order to get results too.
Yep. And that's where I think it's, finding a good practitioner that you resonate with, you agree with their point of view, is really crucial. And it is tricky. I want to acknowledge that too. I went through over 20 doctors, practitioners, acupuncturists, healers, like from the whole spectrum, probably over 10 MDs though, like in the conventional space, and then started branching out into alternative. And so it's not, it's not easy. And I just want to say that because I know people like try it and then they, drop 10 grand with a practitioner and feel like they didn't move forwards. And they're like, I got to do this myself. And I went through that cycle a number of times, but I eventually would just see like, okay, I need a big picture. And thankfully, eventually to find like a great practitioner who became a mentor and helped me through it enough to where I could start to get some momentum. And then once you get the momentum, it'll carry through. And I'm sure now at this point, we're going to get a lot of comments of people feeling overwhelmed or frustrated or like, where do we start? So I want to start to break this down and get a little more granular so people walk away with, a clear step they could try or some ideas, and then, they can narrow it down or again, take it back to their practitioner or find a practitioner who can help them with it. So you really highlighted the mindset piece, which can be important. And I find it can be, I want to dig into it a little because I can find it can be difficult for people too, because they're basically going in a downward spiral, right? And oftentimes at one of the lowest points in their lives, that's what's causing them to be in enough pain to really say, this is taking over my life. I have to, start listening to health podcasts and, finding a practitioner and making all these changes in my life to try and feel better. So on the one hand, there's that weight pulling them down. On the other hand, they're hearing, okay, the mindset is going to help you get out of it. And I remember going through this too. It's probably the worst place mentally I'd ever been. And it was just astonishing to me, some of the thoughts and negativity that were coming out or coming into my head. I'm just like, where is this coming from? I never remember being like this. But when the body's ill and overwhelmed, the wires can get crossed up pretty poorly. So if someone's in that state where they're like, yeah, I believe my mindset's important, but they feel they're struggling with it. You mentioned the gratitude journal help for you? Do you see people having success starting there, or what else is a good place to get a foothold and start to reverse that spiral?
In terms of just the mindset piece?
Yes.
Embrace gratitude. It's huge. Yes, to answer your question, I have seen it completely change lives. And the ability for the nervous system to start calming down, and perspectives on everything in life, especially your health issues, to start shifting. So gratitude is huge. It seems so simple. It seems so woo-woo, but it really does shift the way you think about everything. So if you can just start simple, wake up each morning, before you open your eyes, think about 3 things that you have to be grateful for right now. One of which is, I have this day ahead of me today, full of possibilities. And then before you go to sleep at night, 3 more things. Writing them down is even more powerful than thinking them. So that's one piece of it. But also some other things to shift your mindset is, examine the people that you're hanging out with. Are the people that you're spending most of your time with, are they uplifting people who make you feel good, who make you feel validated, who have positive things to say? If not, you might need to uplevel your people. You might need to create some space between yourself and other people. Are you commiserating in chronic illness Facebook or social media groups that you're on these groups, like complaining about your symptoms all day long? Make space away from those places, because even though misery loves company, it can perpetuate the thoughts about the misery. And then, go walking. Walking is incredibly therapeutic. And when you're walking, you're not scrolling on social media. Maybe you are listening to some relaxation, spa, meditation music or something like that. Outside, not on a treadmill, limiting your screen exposure, all of those things to help calm are simple, free ways to calm the nervous system. And then another piece of it, avoid the news and start your day with, you could prep it the night before you go to bed, with not a podcast on information about your condition or about biohacking or things to geek out on in terms of the health space, but something positive and uplifting and joyful, something that's going to elevate your mood and help you start your day with positive thoughts rather than spiraling into the thoughts of everything that's wrong. It is going to take you further than you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, that's a nice explanation, because as you lay those things out, you can really see it's like you're changing the soil that your mind's operating in, which is what your body's operating in. So, and the mind is so powerful. Actually, to go back to the gratitude piece, one thing that's cool about gratitude and is used in some, like success teachings and things like that, is that it doesn't even have to be true. It's more of the feeling in your body. And the brain doesn't necessarily know the difference. So if you can be grateful for, again, in success principles, it's like, the life that you are wanting to have. If you can start to feel grateful for it now, that literally programs your mind to start to create it, because it has it with the gratitude, but also just for, health or anything. So I know when I was going through it, there were some times where I had such a bad mood. I'm like, I'm not grateful for anything right now, which is totally not true. But like, that's the thought that crossed my head. And so it's like anything, find something. If you think there's nothing, then make something up. And if you can start to let your body have a little bit of that feeling, it's like a soil that you're starting to live in. It's way better than the negativity, which really takes a toll.
I felt like a complete fraud. Believe me, I felt like a complete fraud when I started doing gratitude journaling and trying to shift my mindset, because it was such a far cry from how I had been living. I totally felt like a fraud. It was a fake it till you make it kind of thing. But gradually over time, it started feeling more real. And what I want to emphasize with you guys as you're listening, if you've been struggling with chronic health issues, in many cases, like I was more than 20 years, you're not going to, it's unlikely that you're going to fix it overnight, right? And so by making these little changes in your mindset, in your diet, in your habits, you're planting seeds. Okay. And you want to plant seeds in fertile soil. So, if you plant a seed, you're not going to like dig it up every day to see how it's growing, right? You're just going to water it. You're going to give it some sunlight. You're going to maybe sing to it. And, over time, that seed's going to start to grow if you've given it the right conditions to grow, right? But if, on the same hand, if you plant a seed in soil that has no nutrients in it and you put it in a dark closet, it's probably not going to grow. And what I mean by that, so the analogy I'm trying to get to there is, if you write in a gratitude journal one time and then you forget about it and you never go back to it, there's no consistency, you're probably not going to get any benefit from that. So you're right, it didn't work. It didn't work because you weren't consistent, right? Just like you're not going to go to the gym once and build huge muscles at one trip to the gym. You've got to be consistent with these practices. That's where the magic lies.
Yeah, and I find people can do that. I mean, going back to this idea of fixing it overnight, we all want it fixed overnight. But I find if people actually, if they just start making progress, like, that's enough. Like, it feels great. You're like, oh my God, I feel better this week than last week. Like, when's the last time I could say that? And so it turns out we don't even need it to be fixed overnight. You just need to get to a point where you get a little momentum and see progress. And that's motivating. And even that is fun. Like, you just feel like you're starting to win, even if you're not all the way there. The other thing I want to go back to about what you said about the mindset and the different specific ways people could do that, I want to highlight that a lot of it was doing less. It's like, don't be surrounded by negative people who bring you down. Turn off the news. You don't have to listen to that one more podcast or do that one more bit of research. You don't have to hang out in the Facebook group. So that's like less things. It's like, take those off your plate. And then some of the things you added were so simple, like be out in nature, take a walk, listen to something inspiring, or music that makes you happy. Those are pretty simple things to do. It wasn't like, go run all these errands and XYZ. It's like, a stroll is one of, assuming you have the energy, is one of the easier things to do. So there's a lot of simplicity there, and literally doing less, which is something that most people struggle with, complain about, and feel overwhelmed. So there's a lot of practicality there.
Right. I get, in my practice, I get these, so, and this is how I used to be, these like really type A high achievers, sometimes women, but a lot of times the men, and they've got this spreadsheet that they'll share with me that is, like their day broken down minute by minute, the podcasts they listen to, the supplements they're taking, their, the workout number 1 and workout number 2 and what they eat for lunch. And I'm like, no wonder you're sick. Like, you have your day, regimented to the second, and you've got a spreadsheet for it. They're never not just a being, and they feel like we live in this information overload age, and the information overload is stressful. It's stressful. And, we're on a podcast right now, right? And we're putting out great information for people to benefit from. But some people, because of that information overload, sometimes people are listening to 5, 6, 7 podcasts a day, and every podcast they're getting, different advice or different supplements to use. And they're like, keep it super simple.
So I want to circle back to the diet, because at the beginning you mentioned how low histamine diet is not going to, I don't think you said heal, but say like resolve it. There might be something underneath it. But then you also listed diet as a big piece that people need to focus on that'll eventually help them get better. What do you, can you give specifics about what the most irritating foods are, or conversely, the most healing foods in general, with the understanding this is going to be different for everyone? So you can put whatever caveats you need to on that. But, again, to give someone listening like some concrete ideas of where to start exploring. And especially if you see people often getting off track, or like maybe following a health trend that isn't helpful, love to hear about those too.
From a dietary perspective, my focus is on eliminating all of the inflammatory plant foods, and all the high oxalate greens, the spinach, chard, kale, getting rid of those. Anything that is uncooked that's a vegetable, get rid of that, because when your gut is really inflamed and damaged and just not functioning as optimally as it should, your you've got low stomach acid, and your digestive enzyme production may not be as functioning as optimally as it should be. It's going to be harder for you to break those down. Those foods can also be feeding overgrowth of bacteria and making things like SIBO worse. So getting rid of all of those, getting rid of all of the grains, any and all grains, including corn, soy, and getting rid of legumes, because they have inflammatory plant chemicals that, poke holes in the gut and trigger inflammation. And my approach is just to get rid of all of it. We don't need to run a bunch of sensitivity, spend a bunch of money on sensitivity testing. Let's just get rid of the inflammatory stuff. Dairy is a trigger for a lot of people. So in the beginning, I mean, get rid of all dairy, at least for a period of time. Some people can tolerate some whole fat dairy, but in the beginning, make sure you're getting rid of all the fermented foods that are high in histamine, the yogurts, the kefirs, the kombucha, things like that, all the high histamine stuff, and really focus on a nutrient-dense, meat-based diet. That's really the way you're going to crush inflammation the fastest.
Do you find people get too restrictive when they do that, or how do they do that while still having a complete full diet, getting all the energy they need and things like that?
I find people do very, very well on it as long as their mindset is in the right place. So in the beginning, my approach is let's get rid of as much of the inflammatory stuff in the beginning, so that you can crush as much inflammation as quickly as possible and get some wins. And once, like we were talking about earlier, once they have some wins and they're feeling better, they want to keep going. And really, it's easier. It really is easier. It's not hard to go to the store, get some meat, salt it, and cook it. It's simple. It actually simplifies things rather than complicating things.
So you're doing a carnivore with people?
I wouldn't say I don't do strict carnivore, but more meat-based. Yeah. I want meat on the plate at every meal. Getting rid of primarily get rid of the grains, the legumes, and the leafy greens.
Okay.
The higher oxalate stuff.
And do you find oxalates are an issue for everyone or majority?
A large percentage, but again, my approach is really just to get rid of anything that can be a trigger. And so Getting rid of the higher oxalate foods is important. I run a lot of organic acids tests, and I see high oxalates on almost every single person, oxalate overload. I see a lot of mold, and elevated oxalate levels correlate with mold and also candida, because the exposure can lead to increased oxalates in the body because it interferes with the normal metabolic clearing of the oxalate, leading to the levels being built up. So not fueling the fire, just like you're not eating high histamine foods because you don't want to fuel the fire. We're not giving the fire, we're giving the fire as little fuel to burn as possible.
Right. Okay. So we're kind of wrapping up here. I'll let you decide, is there any other, we've gone through the mindset and the diet, is there any other piece that sticks out as a big one? I know you covered that there's a number of things people will have to handle, but as far as a starter or a higher priority,
your body, every cell of your body has water in it. This is really basic. Make sure you're drinking clean water, preferably not out of a plastic bottle, so limiting the number of toxins that you're taking in, making sure you're drinking plenty of water. Electrolytes can be really, really helpful. There are a variety of different brands. I think one of the cheapest, easiest ways is to make some Soleil water and add that into your, the first morning water in the morning to make sure your cells are hydrated. It's also very energizing, supportive to the adrenals. So clean water, clean air, exposure to the first morning light so that you can sleep well at night. It also will enhance your moods throughout the day. And just giving really basic tips on quick things that people can implement right away. Those are the things that are coming to mind. And then, the things that you're putting in and on your body, like I mentioned earlier, are really important too. So starting the process, if you haven't already done it, of cleaning up your home and your workspace of hormone disrupting chemicals play a much bigger role in the puzzle too than you may imagine. A super simple, easy, fast thing you can do that'll take 15 minutes or less. If you still have like fragranced items around your house, like candles, plug-in air fresheners, the little things that hang down from the mirror in your car, those little reed things that are, those little wooden reeds that are poking into some fragranced liquid that are air diffusers, anything like that, make a clean sweep of your house. Load them all up in a garbage bag and get rid of them, and don't buy those anymore. So just simple things like that.
I want to say, if someone's listening to this and they're saying to themselves, I've done all that and I'm, this histamine is still ruining my life, right? I think a common thing that we say in the chronic illness space, people who are struggling with this, is I've tried everything. Like many people get to the point where they feel like that. When someone is to that point, what do you see as being missed?
A big one is consistency. People don't want to hear that, but it's true. Like I was saying earlier about when you plant a seed, you got to keep watering it. You got to give it sunlight. You got to make sure the soil that it's in is healthy soil. So consistency. Number 2, information overload. People are diving down too many rabbit holes and overwhelming themselves. And that's part of where I've tried everything comes in. They may have tried everything, maybe briefly, but nothing long enough to get wins. So that's another thing. And, sometimes there's environmental things going on, Are they not shutting off their Wi-Fi at night, or, are they being bombarded by excess Wi-Fi or EMFs in their environment? Do they have mold in their living environment? I'll tell you a quick story of a client that I was working with about a year ago. we've been working together for about a year, and she was not getting better. We had run testing on her, lots of testing, and she showed super elevated levels of mold and candida. Candida is a secondary infection. Always see it as a tag along behind mold and heavy metals and parasites and things, gut disruption, anything that's disrupting the immune system. So she had all these things going on. She just wasn't getting better. She had debilitating fatigue. She had an awful rash on her scalp that was just itchy and flaking, and her hair was thinning, and she just was not getting better. And I said, and I had continually been encouraging her to assess her home environment for mold. She's like, but we don't smell any mold. We don't see any mold. And this is a myth, you guys. Mold is, you don't always see it and you don't always smell it. So sometimes you do, but you don't always. So she's like, but it's going to cost so much money, and, we don't have the money. And, it always, for a lot of people, it comes down to the money thing. And we feel like we can't afford something, but sometimes we can't not afford to fix the problem, right? And I'm sure you've heard this objection from people too. But so we finally talked her into assessing the environment for mold. So in the master bathroom attached to her bedroom, they found a bunch of mold underneath the floor where the shower was, and underneath the sink. But the big problem was their bedroom. She lived in Connecticut. Their home was built on a slab, and there was a crack between the foundation and the frame of the house. And water from melting snow and other things had been coming underneath the floorboards. And when they pulled up the floor in her bedroom, the entire plywood subfloor was saturated in black mold. And she had been sleeping in that every night of her life for years and was wondering why she wasn't getting better. You cannot heal in an environment that's making you sick, whether that environment is toxic mold, whether it's a toxic relationship, whether it's a toxic relationship with yourself and your thoughts. You're not going to heal in an environment that's making you sick and is jacking up your nervous system. So.
Yeah, that's such an important message. It took me a long time to get that one too. Because again, I was just so like, all right, what's supplement? Or I was very diet focused too. I'm like, how do I eat? But eventually the analogy that came to really make it all make sense in my mind is like, if you look like a fishbowl, like if the water is dirty and toxic in a fishbowl, you can feed the fish whatever you want. You can give it, the home and colorful rocks and seaweed. It doesn't matter. It's going to be sick. And then conversely, if you clean that water, give it fresh, pure water, probably a lot of things that you do to help the fish will work and will work better. But yeah, things like the mold is a tricky one. A lot of that stuff, because people, if it's not obvious, like you said, if you can't see it, taste it, smell it, touch it, people are like, how could this be an issue? EMFs would be another example of that, completely unseen and a bit intangible, but in a strong EMF environment can really, really affect people.
Yeah. And people with a history of mold exposure tend to be more sensitive to EMFs as well. So everything kind of all ties in together. And just going back to what I said a couple times already, there's usually 50 dead cows upstream, not just one. And it's really a matter of kind of picking them off a little at a time and just improving all of your different environments and having some consistency with it.
All right. So yeah, I want to wrap up with that. Say someone starts to make this consistency, they get a good plan for themselves and stick with it or moving forward. What's the hope? What do people experience? What does that look like as someone starts to step out of it? And if someone's at a low point right now listening to this, is that possible for them?
I want to leave you guys with the belief that healing is possible. The body is made to be in a state of balance, and it's designed to be healthy. It craves being healthy. It wants that. And it will get back to that if you're giving it the right conditions, sort of like that fishbowl that you just talked about. If the conditions are right, then it's totally possible to get better. I was chronically ill for over 20 years. I live symptom-free today. I feel better. I'm 51 right now as we're recording this. I feel better at 51 than I did when I was 20 years old. I have, I've had clients that have been chronically ill for 30 years and, they come to me and they've got 10 different medications that they're taking. And a year later, they're maybe down to 2 of those medications, which is a pretty big win. Maybe they're not totally symptom-free. They haven't figured it all out, but hey, going from 10 medications to 2 medications in a matter of a year is a pretty big win. But I do want to leave people with realistic expectations. You're not going to turn it around overnight, so you've got to stick with it. And, if you've been chronically ill for a few decades, just keep with it. Hold on to the belief that healing is possible, even for you, even if you haven't seen it yet. And, give yourself a good year to start turning things around. Is it possible to feel some wins and feel a little bit better even sooner than that? Absolutely. But to really peel back the layers and start really feeling totally like yourself again, it's probably going to take a year. That's not a long time in the grand scheme of things if you've been sick for 20 or 30.
Yeah, no, it's not. I'm sure most people would take that in a heartbeat because they've been feeling poorly for longer. But I think those stories, just somebody who's been there, who's been in a rough place and gotten better. And, not only have you done that, but then now you help a lot of people and have seen many people do this. I find that just so valuable. I remember when I was not feeling well, like that was one thing I would hang on to. And I'd be like, okay, well, this person, they said it's possible for me. It was possible for them. Like it can happen. Nothing in my body feels like that right now, but like they're saying it. So I'm going to hang my hat on that. And had to do that many times, different people saying it. So it's a helpful message to hear. And yeah, even if it is not an immediate timeline, I really, as people can just, if they start to see benefits, these wins you're talking about, that's all you need. Then you're going the right direction, and it can be a very kind of fulfilling journey and amazing. And the people around you see you go on it, and they often get inspired, and it can lead to a really good place. So it's really important to keep in mind when you're in these tough moments too.
Yeah. And people oftentimes, the healing, overcoming something like this. I know for myself, I totally changed careers after my health issues. And I've had numerous clients who, going through this, launched them on a new path in their life because they saw so many different possibilities through healing that they kind of went in a different direction in terms of their career. And some have even gotten trained in what I'm trained in, which is pretty cool. But I do want to go back to what you said earlier when it comes to the label. And this is where the diagnosis piece that we were talking about earlier, I don't like to go down that road of the diagnosis, because when we get attached to a label, a diagnosis, we create an identity around that. So stop using words like, or phrases like, my headaches, my asthma, my histamine intolerance, my mast cell activation. When you attach a label and an identity to your symptoms, that becomes part of your identity. And so part of fixing this means creating a new identity, an identity of somebody who is healthy and vibrant and crazy about life and excited to wake up every day. That's the energy that you have to lean into to get better.
Yeah, more of that mindset. Tamy, if people want to work with you, want to check out more of your work, where's the best place for them to do that?
There's a couple places. I'm on Instagram. So my handle is Tamy Anderson _FDN. And there's only one M and a Y in my name. So it's TAMY Anderson. And then my website is tamyanderson.com. So those would be the two places. I also have some YouTube videos out there.
Okay, great. We will link to those in the show notes. So if you're listening and want to check out more, just scroll down and click the one you want to see. Tamy, thanks for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Josh. This has been really fun.